Hello and welcome to lecture number 8 of photorealistic and non-photorealistic rendering, and I'm your instructor as always, Leslie Eisted. Now, a few things before we get into content today. First, a reminder, of course, that your assignment 3 is due very, very soon, and I have also made sure that assignment 4 has also been posted, so make sure you take a look at that. The final project information, I'm just finishing up some of the final details, and hopefully I'll have that out for you within the next day or two. And I think it's really important to take a look at what the final project entails as soon as it becomes available to you, because some of the things we're going to ask you to render could take some time, and it's important that you set aside that time in your schedule for the purposes of rendering. And if you need an extra machine to do the rendering, please make sure you contact the school, as there are small render machines that you can use there remotely. The other thing I wanted to say is great job everyone on the midterm. I hope that it wasn't a terrifying experience, but given the grades, which the average was above 83, I think you all did exceptionally well on it. All right, so what is today's topic? So today we are going to move on to the kind of second half of the course. So the first 7 lectures of this course have focused pretty intensely on the photorealistic side of the world. So looking at the rendering equation and the different shading models that we have for different kinds of surfaces. So things like the Lambertian shading model for surfaces which reflect light equally in all directions. So stuff like my mouse here is a diffuse surface. We've looked at shiny object reflections, so things like Phong and Blinn Phong. We've looked at reflection and refraction. We've looked at path tracing and radiosity to get more accurate solutions to the integral and the rendering equation. And at this point, I feel like you have all of the tools you would need to actually create a realistic image. And that's good. Some of the truth of this, though, is that if you look at any major rendering tool, so let's just open one here. I know you can only see half of the logo. So this is Houdini, and if you look at Houdini, if you look at Maya, Blender, all of these tools, everything that we have talked about so far with, direct lighting and indirect lighting and textures and bump mapping, they all have these things built in. You probably will never actually have to implement any of those things that we've talked about in the first 7 lectures. Because I can come into Houdini and all I have to do to get caustics is to drop this caustic light into the scene. Voila, caustics. Now, you might have to do some shader work in order to get a material that mimics what you're actually trying to create, but the act of actually having to implement the ray tracer itself or implement the path tracing yourself, these tools all do it for you. And it's quick and it's easy, and you don't really need to worry about it. What we're moving into now is an area where tools like Maya and Houdini, they have some built-in support, but not much. So now we're actually going to be taking all of the things that you learned about from, computing reflections and things like that, and we're going to be, that's some nice focus errors. We're going to be now manipulating that to, instead of creating a photoreal look, making custom shaders to give us something else. And I think this is where you can really have a lot of fun, and this is where you also get a lot more control yourself over what's actually happening. So I'm excited to move on to this topic. But before I want to talk in great detail about non-photorealistic rendering, I want to kind of motivate some of the areas where it's come from. or the desire to do, where it's come from. So there's two primary places where non-photorealistic rendering has come from. And the first one I want to talk about is called the uncanny valley. So you may have seen this diagram before. I borrowed this, of course, from Wikipedia. And the idea behind this diagram is as our rendering increases in reality, or realism, it gets very, very human, very, very human. And all of a sudden, we reach this point where we're still increasing in the human likeness, but the familiarity or comfort, like, tanks. And all of a sudden, everything looks creepy and unrealistic. It's a very odd idea. And this is called the uncanny valley. Anytime you have something that is very human-like, but makes you feel uncomfortable, it's because it's in this uncanny valley. And this is one of the big problems, actually, with photorealistic rendering, is that, especially when rendering an organic life form, is that you're modeling the subsurface scattering of the face, you've got a highly detailed texture model, and yet, for some reason, despite all of your best efforts to simulate all of the motion of a human, the lighting of a human, the characteristics of a human, it creeps everybody out. It's because you've created something in the uncanny valley. And, this actually happens in real life. So, and it's not just animated things. So this is actually an android, a robot. And they tried very hard to make it human-like. And yet when you look at this, there's a certain amount of creepiness to it. It just doesn't feel right. It's because this is in that uncanny valley. And another place where you'll see the uncanny valley is actually animated films. So the Polar Express film is considered by many to be sitting in the uncanny valley. I haven't actually seen that movie that I remember, but this is a screenshot from it. I would say, yeah, it's bordering on it. Now, the interesting thing is if you increase the human likeness even more, you can actually escape the uncanny valley and become very realistic and believable again. But this uncanny valley here is a trap. And one of the things that modern filmmakers are really struggling with is how do you have animated characters in place of the real characters and not be in this valley? And you might be like, oh, that was a problem from 10 or 15 years ago. I agree, it was a problem 10 or 15 years ago. But it still exists. So the risk of being in that valley is really high. And that's because we're trying really hard to be photoreal. And the problem is if we end up in there, you're going to lose credibility, you alienate audiences, you just make them feel creeped right out. So I have an example, and this is an old example. And this was actually from a photoreal movie, not an animated movie. This is a live action movie. And this is from The Scorpion King, which, sorry, I can't remember how old this movie is. It looks like it was 2002. And I guess, spoiler alert, I think this is a shot from closer to the end of the film. This is supposed to be The Rock as the Scorpion King partially transformed into a scorpion. This is a live action film. This is super creepy. And I remember watching this and saying, oh my gosh, it's so super creepy. Now, admittedly, back in 2002, there is a lot of things that we didn't really think about when it came to photorealistic rendering. I don't think there's a lot of subsurface scattering going on here. There's no, the mesh isn't that great. The hair, look at the hair. It's sticking out on a flat plane. And I mean, part of the reason for this uncanniness here is just the fact that we had some ideas to how to do photorealistic rendering at that point, but we didn't quite have all the tools at this point in time. So maybe we're like, well, that was, 20 years ago. Surely we're better at this now. Okay. Next shot. Spoiler alert, The Eternals. Skip the next 30 seconds if you haven't seen it. Yeah. This is the end of the Eternals. And this is creepy. This is, and I don't actually know what the name of this character is because I've never read any of the comics or stories related to the Eternals, but this character here is supposed to be some kind of troll. And in a live-action movie, if you look at this character, they've brought the realism up, the human likeness up, but it's in the uncanny valley. Now, there's been some interviews because when this got released, there was an outcry online of like, what is going on with this shot? Because everyone was like, it's really creepy. It's really bad. And they said that the excuse was that it was rushed. And this is one of the dangers of doing photorealistic rendering of organic life forms. It's pretty easy to fall into that uncanny valley. And this is definitely in the uncanny valley. It really is. So this brings an interesting question. So as you can see, even as of very recently, it's pretty easy to fall into the uncanny valley. And I'm going to tell you, it's not just humans or troll-like characters. Plants, it can happen with, but generally humans are the ones that we notice in the uncanny valley the most often. Animals are also able to fall into the uncanny valley as well because they are organic life forms that we have certain expectations on their appearance and their motion and their behavior. So if they are behaving in ways that are we're not accustomed to, it can fall into that creepy category. So here's a question. If we're having such a hard time with organic life forms in photoreal rendering, why don't we just not render it photoreal? Well, that's an interesting question. If we don't render it photoreal, will it get rid of the creepiness? And if you look back at the uncanny valley, actually, this kind of suggests that if we just didn't keep progressing towards increasing human likeness, that yeah, it would be perfectly fine. And a lot of studies have also shown that we as humans actually have this funny ability to attribute human characteristics to non-human characters. We're completely comfortable with this. It's called anthropomorphism. And we see it all over the place. So movies like The Lion King, not the quote recent one, because that one's actually a bit in the uncanny valley itself. But the original Lion King, the animated, the toon Lion King. And then there are lots of short films like Logorama. Logorama is a bunch, and if you haven't seen that, I recommend you go see it. It's an Oscar award-winning short film. Logorama has a bunch of logos. Like, let's choose an object off my desk with a logo. Here's an Energizer battery. And it would be like the Energizer battery logo. So the pink bunny, I guess. And those are the characters in the film. And things like Xbox logos, actually, they are the characters. And we are able to easily attribute the human characteristics to these very inhuman things. So this is one way that we can actually avoid the uncanny valley, and the audience will be perfectly comfortable with it, and we know this in advance. So I thought to take an experiment here. Let's take those uncanny shots from before and apply a filter to them and see if we can take them out of that creepy zone. So here's the shot from the Scorpion King again. It's very creepy, really, really creepy shot. And it's not creepy in terms of the movie creepy. It's creepy in almost cringe territory. Okay, so I took this into Photoshop and I applied something known as the poster effect. And the poster effect is essentially going to quantize the colors and make it look like kind of a cutout poster. So there we go. Before, after. Actually, we're no longer creeped out by this. I'm no longer creeped out by this. And I almost want to say that this actually is kind of cool looking. I feel like if they had actually done the whole movie like this, it would have been received a lot better. The movie was not let me just look at the IMDb. It's a 41% on Rotten Tomatoes. Actually, that's a lot better than I thought it was. But what we did here was this very simple filter. Creepy? Creepy. And it's because we took it back from that valley. We decreased the human likeness. And I actually really like the tone that that's gave it. So there, we were able to fix it, and it was really fast. And yes, it is actually really fast to do this. So here's the shot from the Eternals again. Super creepy little troll guy. Doesn't feel real. And I know that you may not be able to see a huge difference between these two, but there actually is. So this was applying a painted filter. So we turned it from something that was supposed to be photoreal, and now it's supposed to be like a Renaissance painting. And all of a sudden, that creepy factor goes away, and I almost want to say it adds to the character of the shot. Just like with the Scorpion King shot. It improved it significantly. So this is an interesting idea. We can use non-photorealistic rendering to actually take something that was in the uncanny valley or near it and take it completely out and make the shot comfortable and actually use it to tell part of the story. So non-photorealistic rendering is a very powerful tool for this purpose. Now, there are other ways that you could avoid it. So we've seen that it's a very real thing. The two ways of avoiding it are being super, super photorealistic. So way on the right. I'm going to tell you right now, that's really hard to do. We're getting better at it, but I can tell you in the Autodesk Faker Photo Challenge, those are the easiest ones to tell because it's hard to be on the far right of that curve. The really easy way to not fall into the uncanny valley is to be on the left, which means don't be photorealistic. Okay. So non-photorealistic rendering, what we're really doing is we're trying to represent our scene in some artistic way, not in a realistic way. So we're not going to try to do, subsurface scattering shaders for skin. We're not going to be looking at perfect reflections that are physically based and do Fresnel, and we're not going to be looking at subsurface scattering or anything like that. We're trying to render things in a stylistic way that still conveys what the object is, but not accurately, more in an artistic way. And sometimes that artistic way can actually be a part of the narrative of the story, as we will see. So as I said, it can be part of the story. So for example, we can use non-photorealistic rendering as part of a plot device. So let's say you're going from Kansas to Oz in The Wizard of Oz. Well, they actually do something like this. In the original one, they go from a sepia tone, Kansas, and when they go into the fantasy world, it turns into bright colors. So they've used that rendering style as a plot device. And you could do this going from realistic to non-photorealistic to show the transition from reality to fantasy. You could do it when you travel through time. For example, if you go back in time, well, in the old days, they didn't have color photography, so you could go back to black and white, for example. Things like that. If you're doing flashbacks and flash forwards, you might use a non-photorealistic style to convey the fact that your memory is foggy or this is a different time frame. So non-photorealistic plot devices just to change from the ordinary. It's a really useful tool, and I think it's worth spending some time on looking at some of the different variations that we can have. And I do know that your third-year graphics course introduced some of these ideas, but we're actually going to be looking at these ideas in a lot greater detail and a lot more of these ideas. Now, you might be thinking, has anyone ever done this before? Yes. Absolutely. So this is a movie called What Dreams May Come. And part of the movie, not to spoiler alert, is actually in a painted world. And this painted world was done by computer. And I believe this algorithm was a variation of one by Winowitz, which would have been the mid-90s, if memory serves me. But it's a really cool algorithm, and we will see algorithms to do paintings like this closer to the end of the course. So anytime Robin Williams' character moved into this alternate world, it moved into this painted painting, which is kind of neat. And there are other movies, by the way, which have done similar things. There are whole movies that have been rendered in non-photorealistic styles, and we've seen some of them previously. Okay. So, what all kinds of styles do we have access to for non-photorealistic rendering? Well, the truth is, the limit is your imagination. Whatever you can imagine, you can do. One of the really fun things I like about computer graphics is that even when you make a mistake, sometimes it ends up really cool. And I know the first time I implemented a painterly rendering algorithm, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I didn't realize that the data structure I was storing my values in could only store positive values. It couldn't store negative values. Forgot that. And as a result, I had a weird, that error because it wasn't storing negative values. All of my stroke directions were positive directions only. And that's not really what we were going for. But it ended up looking really cool because what it ended up looking like was drippy paint. So, mistake ended up looking really cool. And I love that about computer graphics, and that even mistakes, like computation errors, oops, I forgot there's no negatives, it still ends up with something cool. And non-photorealistic rendering, your imagination really is the limit. Whatever you can dream of, there might be a way to do. But if we were to look at things traditionally, there is toon shading, which I'm sure many of you have seen. We'll look at that closer in a minute. There's drawing things with contours or silhouettes, so things like pen and ink drawings. Things with stipples, tiny, tiny dots, dithering, hatching, cross-hatching, things like that. Painterly rendering is stuff like impressionist paintings, stuff where there are visual brush strokes. Okay, we're going to look at all of these in a much, much greater detail in the coming lectures, but I would like to talk a little bit about each of them today. And then we're going to look at some simple techniques for NPR at the end of today. So to start off with toon shading, which is also sometimes known as cell shading. Really what we're doing here is we're trying to make things look like cartoons. If you were to watch a cartoon, like something like The Lion King or any of the, the old Disney movies, the palette of colors is very, very simple for the characters themselves. They don't have, smooth gradient shading. They tend to have very strict and harsh differentiation between the different amounts of lighting. So there's a shadow color and a highlight color and maybe one or two in between colors and very harsh lines between them, nothing smooth. And one of our desires with NPR is to actually recreate that look, except not by hand. We want to either take an image, like an actual old-fashioned photograph, and we want to, turn it into a cartoon drawing. Or we want to take our 3D scene and render it as if it's a cartoon automatically. So cartoon and cell shading looks at how can we transform something that's photoreal into something that looks like a cartoon. So I told you about the teapot in our last lecture as being one of the famous models used for testing. So here we see it actually with the toon shading. And this one here, you see we don't have any shades, but we've got the contours that we would expect to see with cartoon. And then on this final one on the right, you can see we actually have, you know, there's our dark tone, our highlight tone, and a couple mid-tones. And here's actually a couple that I did myself. So this is a cat and a horse. Hopefully that's obvious. And the cat has only 3 tones. The cat has a shadow tone, a mid-tone, and a highlight tone. And the horse actually has quite a few more. I think this one might have 6 or 7 tones. I did this quite a while ago. And we've used these tones to actually make these look like cartoons. Now I also have outlines for this as well. Right. So contours and silhouettes kind of goes hand in hand with the toon shading because you rarely just see this kind of shading without some kind of outline. Now the outline may not always be in black. Sometimes it's in just like the shadow tone. That's a common one. But contours and silhouettes are very important, not just for toon shading, but also if you wanted to do like a pen and ink drawing or a pencil sketch or anything like that. So contour drawing is something that actually exists. It's been around for a really long time. It's what's capturing the general shape, the outlines of the objects, creases and folds, and things like that. It's not going to include any of the shading generally, and it's not going to include a lot of the finer details. We're really just trying to capture the shape of the actual object. And this is something that we can also do with non-photorealistic rendering. Here I have done it for 3D models. And I apologize, these probably look really blocky because they're actually really small images. And they've kind of got blown up here. But what we can see here, now this is a little bit different from this actual artist's contour drawing. But if you were to actually do a study of contour drawings, you can see sometimes the stroke size changes because the amount of pressure is changing and so on. And so here you can see we've kind of done something like that. We have the stroke width varying, presumably with an amount of the amount of pressure. That's actually not how I did that here, but we'll talk about how I did these in the next lecture, actually. These were actually really easy to do. So contours and silhouettes are very important because now what I can do is I can take this and I can put this on top of toon shading. Or if this was an image that is just straight up, it's a nice pen and ink drawing. It's pretty cool. But if we were to think of pen and ink in the greater sense, we are not just thinking of our contour lines and our silhouette lines. We're also thinking about all of the shading that actually lives in the drawing. So this is an old pen and ink drawing. And what you can see here is this has got a lot of hatching and cross-hatching. This one doesn't actually have any stippling that I can see. But these line constructs are actually used to help depict, you know, this is in shadow or this is in highlight. And so this is something that we might also want to recreate. Wouldn't it be cool to see, you know, a little short film done in something like this style? That'd be really cool. And there's various techniques that we can use to do this. This is one that we will actually see a bit later as well. And this is actually stippling that's going on here. And I have a small rounding error, which is why all the dots appear to be avoiding the bottom corner. But what we've done is we've taken a photograph. This is a photo of a lion statue, and this is a photo of some vases. And we've ask the computer to render it with dots. And you can see that in the darker areas, the dots are closer together, and in the lighter areas, the dots are further apart, conveying the shading. It's a pretty neat effect. And it's not hand-drawn at all. And by the way, there's other methods, so you don't just have to use stipples. There are techniques that we can use to do hatching, and we will take a look at those a little bit later as well. Another style that we see, and you've probably seen me show this picture before, is the idea of painterly rendering. This is a large style of non-photorealistic rendering algorithms where we're trying to recreate something that looks like a painting. So generally speaking, that means we want to create the appearance of strokes. Now, whether that's pointillist strokes, such as dots, or expressionism or impressionism, or just a realistic painting, we're trying to use actual strokes to recreate the scene. And in this case here, you have this photo, and we have painted it, because it was the computer that painted it, with individual actual paint strokes. It's a pretty cool effect. And this algorithm here, by the way, this painterly idea is what Dreams May Come was actually using. This is a much more modern one. Oh, scrolling the wrong way. So here's actually a couple of my own results using Painterly Renderer. This is the one with the drippy paint. So you can kind of see here that all of the strokes in this painting all seem to kind of be going in the same-ish direction, like this. And it kind of looks like wispy, or that it was blowing paint, or it was just really runny paint. This was not on purpose. This was an error, but it ended up looking really cool. This is actually rendered from the fixed version, and this is where we're kind of create a cool pointillist effect. And you can see here that these two images are very, very different in the stylization, but at the same time, it's interesting to see how much variation in style you can get just from a painterly renderer. I can tell you that the code that did this one here of the bridge over the water is the same code, minus the bug fix, that generated this image over here. It's pretty cool, right? I think it's pretty cool. And these were all done from photographs, by the way. Now, there's so many other different non-photorealistic rendering algorithms out there. It would take us forever to actually talk about all of them. There are things like cubism algorithms, there's fauvism algorithms, and then what's kind of taken over in this field here is something called style transfer. And the idea behind style transfer is that it's using machine learning, so usually deep neural networks. You are going to give it an image whose style you like, and then you give it a photo of your own, and you say, okay, identify the style present in this image, and I want you to apply it to the other one. So this one here was a photo of a lab that we've applied a style to. And these algorithms work okay, varying levels of success. For the most part, I think they work reasonably. However, they seem to have some issues with long stroke-based algorithms. But this looks pretty cool. Some examples of some other things. So this is actually an algorithm that takes a photo and tries to turn it into a fauvist scene. It's pretty cool, right? We're taking realistic things, be they actual models or images, and turning them into pieces of art, or something that looks like a piece of art. And here's another example. This, again, was done from a photograph, and this is just creating a loose gesture drawing of a rose. And again, this was not done by a human. This was done by a computer using just math. And we'll actually look at how to create something like this, again, a little bit later in the course. So it's important to talk about what do we apply non-photorealistic rendering algorithms to. And the truth is there are three major approaches. The first approach is scene or object space. So this is actually happening in something like Houdini. You've got a 3D world, a 3D scene, and we're actually going to create shaders that we can apply to the different objects in the scene to create those non-photorealistic effects. So if you actually open up Houdini, and I probably shouldn't have shut it because it takes a minute to load. There we go. So we can actually, let's use torus. So we'll put the torus in here. Let's turn the torus so we can actually see it. When you go to the material palette, there is actually two non-photorealistic shaders. Only two. So let's do the Toon color shader. And it's some weird gray color. I don't want that. So let's do a nice red for the shaded color and then bright red for that. Oh, we need a highlight color. Yellow. I don't know. It's so random. And then let's put in a point light in the scene. It's pretty cool, right? So this here, we actually have a shader that has been created and applied to the object as its material. So this is the first approach to non-photorealistic rendering, is actually creating shaders which are applied to the actual models themselves. The other one, by the way, I closed the wrong window. Oh, it's one of those days. So that's the scene and object space. So it's actually happening in 3D. The other primary approach is image space. So that means you have a photo or an image on your computer, and we're going to use manipulations of the pixel data in that image to apply some kind of filter or modify the image in some way. And then the third approach is a hybrid approach. And actually, the image on this slide uses the hybrid approach. So it starts out in image space, and how these dots are actually placed into the scene is using 3D geometry. It's actually a really, really cool technique. And it sounds like a complicated math technique, but there's this OpenGL cheat that you can do. It's so neat. We'll take a look at it another day in a couple lectures. But the idea is that a hybrid algorithm is using both the image space and 3D geometry to create the effect. There's not, I want to say, a terrible number of these algorithms, but some of them, they definitely do exist, like this one here, which is really cool. So I guess we kind of showed this, but just to give you some examples. So stylization that is applied to scene object space is like this Toon shaded horse here. Image space, again, that stylization of the pixel, so like this pointillist rows here. And then the hybrid, again, is just these stippled images. All right. So how I want to focus the rest of this lecture is looking at some really simple image manipulations that you could do right now to create a non-photorealistic effect. And these manipulations can be used on their own, or they can be combined together to create even more different styles. Now, all of these effects we're going to talk about right now, they're all happening in the image space. So what I mean by that is they're happening to an actual image itself. So just a refresher, I'm going to open up a tool. And I know most of you at home are probably not using the GIMP, but I'm going to use the GIMP because I'm on a Linux machine. But a lot of the examples that we're going to look at today are actually done in Photoshop. It doesn't matter what you prefer to use. You can use whatever. I'm just going to grab an image and shove it into the GIMP here. So we have an image. It can be a PNG file, a JPEG file, a TIFF file, whatever kind of format you want. And just so that you are, just to refresh your memory, these images have a width and a height, and they're comprised of a bunch of pixels. And each pixel, of course, has a color. Zoom in. There's the individual pixels. You can use this tool here to figure out what color it is. The color of the pixels, there are different color spaces by which we can actually use to describe the color, but in this course we generally are going to refer to things by their RGB value. That's their 3-channel color, red, green, blue. Although certainly there are other ways that you could do these things. Something else that you should keep in mind, you're going to see this term several times throughout the course, is the idea of luminance. Luminance is the apparent brightness of a color. And there are many different formulas to compute luminance. Luminance can take a color that has a red, green, blue value, which is 3 channels, and it's going to produce a single value, which is the apparent brightness. I will be giving you the formulas for luminance at another time, but just so you're aware of the term. So for example, luminance, the brightest would be white. That would be the brightest color, and black would be darkest. It's essentially, if you do the luminance of an image, it's going to create a grayscale image where most of the colors, the gray tones, are unique. All right, so we're going to be working in image space for all of these lovely samples. And by the way, if you don't have access to Photoshop, you are, of course, welcome to use the GIMP in this course. GIMP is free and cross-platform. That means it runs on Linux, which is what I'm running right now. It runs in Windows, and it runs in macOS, so everybody has access to it. Now there's lots of different things that we can do in image space which are really, really easy, and you don't need to implement anything because every major tool will implement these for you. There are different kinds of blurs that we can apply. We can do things like edge detection. We can do quantization. We can do mosaics. Many different techniques that we can do to create certain effects and appearances. The first one, which is one of my absolute favorites, I use it in a lot of different places, is called the median filter. Now, these filters are actually matrices or techniques that are applied via something called convolution. We are not going to look at what convolution is, but I will kind of show you via diagram how these things are going to be applied. So what the median filter is it's a denoiser. The whole goal of the median filter is to reduce the amount of noise in an image. So this here is, it's not really that noisy, but I can go into the GIMP and, oh, there it is. In Photoshop, it's under noise, but in GIMP, it's under blur. I can do median blur. And what it's going to do is it's going to apply a special filter. I can set the radius, which is how big of the block we're going to be looking in. So I can, and as I do this, so I'm going to adjust the radius of the median filter. And you can see here how it's getting smoother and smoother and smoother. We're removing so much noise. It's really cool. How does it work? So it's a denoising operation that uses the pixels around the target pixel to as in points of information to make a decision about what color the target pixel should be. So here I have just a 3x3 grid. X is the pixel I am trying to figure out what color it should be. The median filter looks at the neighborhood of the pixel and it chooses the median value. What that means is if we put them in sorted order, which one's in the middle? That's it. So if I were to sort these colors, tiles, I have 4 reds and I have 5 blues. So I have 9 colors. The one in the exact middle is blue. And so X is going to stay blue. There you go. That's all the median filter does. Now, this is a surprisingly good filter for removing noise. One of the nice results of the median filter is that when you have an edge, like a harsh edge, like we have here, they generally get preserved. And one of the problems with denoising algorithms is that the edges are often destroyed, but edges are actually very important to perception, so we want to keep them as best as possible. So, median filter, meant for denoising. It's really, really fast to apply this. Like, really, really fast. I mean, you were watching it in the GIMP there, and we can literally just go back, filters, blur, median blur, and I can just modify this. And it happens really, really quickly. Now, it will get slower the larger the neighborhood is because it has to look at more and more values. But you can see here, though, that even when we set it to a really big size, a lot of the harsh edges are actually preserved, which is a very desirable feature for any kind of denoising algorithm. But it removes any other detail from the image because, of course, it's going to consider all other detail to be noise. So plus is it's fast and it generally preserves strong edges. Downside is it's going to be removing a lot of the details. However, that actually looked pretty cool, didn't it? Like going back to this. If I go back to this and I set the radius to really high, it kind of looks painted, doesn't it? It kind of looks like a watercolor painting almost. So this filter was originally designed for removing noise. But what we have discovered is that actually it's a really fast, cheap way to make something look almost like a watercolor painting. So I've chosen a couple photos kind of randomly from my photo repo to apply all of these filters to for the duration of this lecture. So we've got this funny flower here. And when I apply the median filter, this was actually done in Photoshop, not in the GIMP, we can see here now even though we have lost some of the finer details, the stronger edges have been preserved and we almost get a painted look. And here is another one. And so this is, some nice snowy trees. And when we apply the median filter to it, hey, it looks kind of painted. Actually, GIMP does a better job. All right. Here you go. Cheap, fast, painterly. Now, there's no strokes here. There's no strokes. But at a distance, this was really fast, and it does kind of look like a painted picture. So that's cool. What other kinds of filters could we have? Another common one is called the box blur or box filter, and it's really, really similar to median. But instead of choosing the middle value to be the pixels value, we're going to take all of the pixel colors within that radius and we average them. So if we were to average all of the colors around X, we would get purple. And so X would end up being a purple shade. And let's see if we have that in the GIMP here. I don't use the GIMP that often. No, we do not have box blur. But we'll look at the other blur shortly anyways. So I have some examples right here. So here's our photo again, and here I've applied the box blur. Now, here's the big difference. When you had the median filter, you can see here that the edges are very much preserved, but that the finer details are lost. So some things are preserved quite well, but other things are lost. With something like the box filter, the edges are not preserved, but neither is anything else. The amount of distortion to the image is equal because we're just averaging all the pixel values for the region. And then for our snowy scene, you can see here that, again, it's just equally fuzzy. There's no edge preservation. Now you might be like, well, that kind of looked like the median one, but let's go back to the median one. Look at that. In the median one, you can see that these strong edges that we would want to be preserved are actually preserved. But when we apply the box blur, they're not. Okay, fair enough. What other kinds of lovely little blurs do we have? Well, another one which you've probably seen is the Gaussian blur. And the Gaussian blur, it's not simple. I can't show you a simple diagram for this one. But essentially, we are going to do a weighted average of the pixels surrounding the target. And the weight is based on the Gaussian distribution function, hence why it's called Gaussian blur. And if you're wondering what's the Gaussian distribution function, here it is. Sigma is a parameter that you can specify, and essentially what it's going to do is it creates this lovely little weighting here where things that are further from the average are contributing less than things that are close by. And when we apply the Gaussian blur, you can see here, again, beautifully smooth blur, no edges preserved at all. But it looks a lot smoother and softer than the box blur. And we can actually see this filter in real time over here in the GIMP. So let's open up the Gaussian blur. And now in the GIMP, we can actually control the X and the Y. So and I have them locked together. But as you can see, as we increase the radius, more and more and more. It's pretty neat. We got rid of the noise, but we got rid of all the other details too. Probably not what we wanted. Okay. So median, box, Gaussian blur, lens blur, all of these different blurs, their purpose was originally for denoising. Because as many of you know, when you take a photo, especially if it's like late at night and you're using the wrong ISO setting, it's going to have a lot of grain in it, and that may not be desirable. Another place that noise can arise from is if you're using any kind of lossy compression. So if you're using JPEG, for example, JPEG is actually a lossy compression algorithm, and so your image is going to have some artifacts, especially around edges, and those artifacts are going to, well, they're going to maybe not make your image look as nice as it could be. So we would use something like the median, the box, or the Gaussian blur to denoise the image and remove those artifacts. However, of course, they all cause a loss of detail, especially if you're using box or Gaussian blur, and the reason for that is that the colors bleed outwards past the edges. Median filter is nice because it keeps those nice crisp edges crisp, and as a side effect of how median blur works, it ends up looking like a painting. All of these algorithms, though, you'll know, were very fast to apply. You can apply them in real time, and that means that you could actually be applying median filter while you're watching the movie, and you wouldn't see any delay. edge detection. So sometimes people call this feature detection. I call it edge detection. Edge detection is we want to find the edges in an image. So things like contours, silhouettes, creases, folds, the edges of patterns, maybe. So that's what we want. We want to be able to identify the edges of the shapes. We want to do real-time rotoscoping. The reality is that our edge detection algorithms, yes, we get all of these things, but we also get all of the apparent edges that don't actually exist. So harsh lighting, so like strong shadows. So you can see some strong shadows here on my neck from my hand. That would get rendered as an edge because it's technically an edge, even though it's not a surface edge. So any kind of edge created by shadows or direct lighting, any kind of pattern or texture. So this dress has stripes, so those would all be identified as edges, even though they're not contours or silhouettes. Edge detection cannot determine the difference between a pattern and a contour. It's not able to do that yet. And there are many techniques that we can actually do to find edges. A lot of them are going to actually compute the derivative of the image. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, I know a little calculus, and I know what a derivative is. How do you take the derivative of an image? Actually, it's really easy. We'll talk more in greater detail about the derivative of the image when we talk about painterly rendering, because computing the derivative of the image is actually one of the really important steps to it. But there are other filters that we can use, which are applied via convolution. Again, we're not going to talk about convolution. These algorithms can be used to find edges. And effectively, it's just varying ways of computing the derivative of the image using a filter. And they are things like Sobel, the Sobel filter, the Gabor filter, the Pruitt filter, the Roberts Cross. There's a whole pile of them. Generally speaking, there is one for the X direction and one for the Y direction, and then you have to add the results together. But these filters exist for computing the edges. There are other techniques for doing edge detection, such as the Canny edge detection algorithm. But again, they all suffer from this reality of not being able to figure out the difference between a contour and just edges of shadows. So let's actually apply some. So these images in the slides are from Photoshop, and then I'll show you the results when we do it in the GIMP as well, just so you can see some of the variations. So there's our lovely flower. Again, you can clearly see there's should be lots of edges, things like around each of these little petals. And when I apply edge detection from Photoshop, that's the result. It actually looks pretty cool. Look, an NPR algorithm, and it was really easy, right? Okay. And then our winter scene. Okay, maybe not that nice. It's okay. So let's do it over here. So in the GIMP, you're going to go to Filters, Edge Detection. And so GIMP actually has a lot more options for edge detection. So they have a difference of Gaussians, which if memory serves me, that's actually part of the Canny edge detection algorithm. They've then got Laplacian, the Sobel filter, and the image gradient. Image gradient, by the way, is just it's using central differencing, which is the algorithm I will show you for doing the derivative of the image at a later date. So let's do Sobel. So there's the Sobel edges. And one of the things you'll notice, and it's really hard to see here, they don't give me a lot of options, there's no presets, is that there's a lot of noise. Oops. I was zooming out instead of zooming in. There's a lot of noise. So much noise. Don't really like all that noise. So maybe we should use a different edge detection algorithm. So let's undo the Sobel filter. Let's try another one. So let's do edge detect. I like Laplace, but didn't do anything. Now, I know why it didn't do anything here. Because Laplacian is looking at edge crossing, and there wasn't any in this case. Not any strong ones anyways. So that's not a good edge detection algorithm for this image. Let's try another one. Let's do difference of Gaussians. And let's increase our radiuses. It's still noisy. And this is actually a problem with a lot of edge detection algorithms, is that there's so much noise in the result. And it doesn't matter how fancy of an edge detection algorithm I actually use, the noise becomes a problem. The noise is due to a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons you get noise is because the image actually contains a lot of dust or grain, compression artifacts from JPEG, and just life imperfections are going to cause there to be a lot of noise. What I really want to do is reduce or eliminate the edges around noise and make sure that the edges that are salient are actually very visible. And the reason why we talked about the denoising algorithms before we talked about edge detection is because this is where we're going to start piecing these things together. And that is, we want to get rid of the noise so that the edge detection from the edges, so we need to get rid of the noise in the actual image so the edge detection algorithm doesn't pick it up. Okay, so let's denoise the image. So in Photoshop here, we ran a denoise, and here is it with noise, and here is it with a blur applied beforehand. So I think I did the box blur. Now it looks a little bit embossed, actually like a 3D plastic sheet sitting over top of everything. And that is one of the downsides of applying a denoising algorithm beforehand, especially something like a blur. A median filter can actually help you out here a little bit more. So this is before noise denoising and then after denoising. You'll notice that a lot of the noise has actually disappeared. Now let's look at that. Oh, that's Houdini, not the Gimp. So let's apply a blur. I want to do a median blur. I'm going to do that much. And then I will apply my edge filter. Edge detect. Let's do Sobel again. Look at that. It's so much less noisy. We still have our edges strongly noticeable, but the impact of the noisy surfaces has significantly been reduced. And this is actually an important result. We can impact the quality of the edge detection by applying blurs or denoising algorithms prior to running them. Now, edge detection is a very, very simple approach for finding contours and silhouettes of a scene. So we could use that as our style. Let's say we want to create a pen and ink drawing, you know. It's kind of a pen and ink drawing right there. All I had to do was apply a Sobel filter. That is very fast to do. That, again, can happen in real time. It's very, very simple to do. However, these algorithms are incredibly susceptible to noise in the image, which means that the salient edges, the actual, the edge of the tree, the edge of the petals, they are present, but so are the edges of everything else, and those are equally visible. We can apply blurs to denoise the image, which will preserve some of the more salient edges and get rid of some of the unimportant edges. However, there tends to be a loss of sharpness. So we end up with this embossed effect because now the edge algorithms have, instead of a sharp edge, they have a soft edge. But regardless, this is soft and simple. Okay. So we've looked at two methods so far for doing very, very, very simple non-photorealistic rendering. And again, these are all image space. Another one I want to talk about is quantization, which is a simplistic approach to doing toon shading. The idea behind quantization is that we know that our typical RGB image has red channel, blue channel, and a green channel, and there are 8 bits typically used for each, which means that you could have 16 million or more possible colors. Because we know that cartoons tend to use a simplified palette, one of the things that we can do is to restrict the number of colors we're able to actually use in the image. So if you had 16 million colors in your image, we might say you can only use 2, white and black. So quantization is going to be reducing the number of available colors. So I went into Photoshop and I took this image and I reduced it to 2, just black and white. That's a pretty cool thing. That's a really cool result. A non-photorealistic rendering just by doing quantization down to 2 colors. And here's the other image. It's pretty cool, right? Now this doesn't look like toon shading because we've just done two colors, black and white. Oh, excuse me. However, it does very much have a poster feel to it that is kind of interesting. So there's lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can actually implement this. One of the ways that you could do it is thresholding, and that's actually what has been done here. I explicitly thresholded this. I said anything. So first thing I did was I converted the image to grayscale in Photoshop, and then after I converted it to grayscale, I chose a value of gray, and I said everything that is darker than that value, make it black, and everything that is brighter than that value, make it white. Done. Thresholding. And you can extend that to multiple colors. What you would use is a distance metric, which is going to tell you how far is this color from the target color. And you set a threshold distance. Anything that is more than so many units away from the target color is not going to be that target color. It'll be something else. If it is within that distance of the target color, then it becomes the target color. So that's a thresholding mechanism. And that can be done by pre-selecting the colors you want to use in the image. Another approach that you can take, which I've used for other various purposes, is this concept of k-nearest neighbors. Now, what k-nearest neighbors does is it tries to find, I'm actually going to bring up a diagram here. So you've got all these different points. So all these funny little X's here. And let's say I wanted to have 3 neighbors. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the position, which would be right here, and right here, such that these kind of boundaries, everything that's in here belongs to that one, these all belong to this one, and all of these points belong to that one. So I'm trying to identify these neighborhoods where the color is closer to this neighborhood than any other neighborhood. And just, in order to do this, we don't have to say what these red colors are. We just have to say how many of these points we want to find. And this is actually a machine learning algorithm that's employed in several places, but that is another way that we can actually perform quantization. Of course, that is going to be a little bit more expensive. Oh, excuse me. Whereas thresholding and pre-selecting your colors are going to be very fast. Now, what we can do is we can do different levels. So this one here, I think I have 6 levels of color. These were not pre-selected. I believe this was using KNN to actually automatically select the colors for us. So you get this cool poster-like drawing. And there is the one for the snowy scene. Now, I actually don't like the one for the snowy scene. And what I don't like about the one for this one is this bush and these trees are the gray, and it just seems out of place. Maybe that's just me. So it doesn't always work, for the record. These don't always work. So we can do similar things in the GIMP, by the way. So let me just undo all these things that I've done to our poor little bokoblin here. What I can do is I can, in the GIMP, you go to Colors, Posterize, and it actually lets me select the number of levels. So that's 102 levels. So let's set it down to 1 level. I guess it doesn't let me go lower than 2. So here it's given me just a very small number of colors. And then as I increase it, I get more and more color detail. And there are other methods that you can do to do this. Again, you don't have to use posterize. So there's thresholding. We can adjust the threshold. Yeah. So there you go. Different ways of applying thresholds. And you get an instant NPR result from a photo. That made the photo way more interesting. Because that was just a photo of a stuffy. My house is real bokoblin free. So what about some other simple things that we could do in image space to create non-photorealistic effects? Another one is mosaics or tiling. And this is actually very similar to how a median filter or a box blur would be applied. But the idea is that when you're looking at the neighborhood, instead of just setting the center pixels color, set the whole neighborhoods. So what we could do is set it to be the median or the average. And in this case, to do the tiling, I've chosen the median of each 3x3 block. So this upper 3x3 block, the median was blue. So all 9 of those pixels become blue. The median of this lower block is red. So all of those pixels become red, not just the middle one. And then likewise purple and blue for the other 2 quadrants. So that's a very, very simple thing that you can do to give the appearance of a mosaic or a tiling. And Photoshop, of course, has several different implementations. I'm going to show you one of their fancier ones, where they've actually overlaid these lines and kind of jittered it a little bit. But we take this and we turn it into something that looks like a tiling. And it gives you this really cool result, really, really cheap and fast. And of course, we can do it over in the GIMP as well. Although where that one is, I don't remember. Let's see. I think it's glass tile. Well, let's do glass tile. Yeah, it's glass tile. So we have too small of tiles. Now this one has a little bit of extra distortions going on, but you get the idea. And there's all kinds of different ways to do it. That was an artistic one. I know they have the basic tile one somewhere else, but I don't remember where it is. Again, I don't use the GIMP that often. All right. So we've shown you some very, very simple ideas. We've shown you blurring techniques, edge detection, quantization, and mosaics. And given just those 4 very simple things, we can produce some interesting results, but we can actually produce more interesting results by combining multiple filters together. So just to give you some examples, so here's our flower again. And what I did to create this particular variation of the flower, which kind of has a painted look, it looks very watercolory, I applied a median filter, I did an edge detection, and I multiplied the edges by the mosaic, or not the mosaic, the image, the median filtered image. And what that ended up doing is it created an enhanced appearance around the edges themselves, which kind of reinforced that watery look of watercolors, because it's going to produce this buildup of color right along the edges. So this kind of looks like a watercolor, and all I did was median filter multiplied by the edges. Done. Now, this one here is very similar again. What I did for this one was, again, I did a denoising filter. And then instead of multiplying the full color edges, I thresholded the edges and made any of the edges that I wanted to keep zeros, so that when I multiplied the edges by the blurred image, they would appear black. So I created almost a toon shaded image with outlines. Very, very quick and easy. And just to show you those same 2 effects with our other image as before. So there's the watercolor painting. And again, by multiplying it by the edges, you can see we've built up the color near the edges of each of the little paint blobs, which is how a lot of watercolor painters actually would observe the paint behaves. You get a buildup of pigment right along the borders, as long as you're not painting on wet paper, of course. But I don't paint on dry paper often. And then this is another one where we've kind of created a toon shaded look, all just by multiplying the thresholded edges in. Now this one actually here looks like a movie you may have seen. So I'm actually going to bring up a screenshot of the movie, which I've probably searched for 300 times on this computer. So some of you may have seen the movie A Scanner Darkly, which is a film from 2006 with Keanu Reeves. And this is actually a movie that's completely done in an NPR style. And in fact, you can see here, we have a toon shaded scene. And in the toon shaded scene, we also have our suggestive contours and our silhouettes. And this was actually a bit more costly of an operation than what we've done on our slide here. And we'll actually get into how to do something like this next class. But we did something almost similar, really, really quick and easy. And we could have made this even simpler, or even more similar, but instead of doing the median filter to give the paint look, if we had done quantization followed by multiplying by the edges. So you can get some really cool effects when you combine these different things together. So let's do some playing then in the GIMP to see what we can do. So I'm going to make this little bokoblin dude a little bit bigger. And let's do a median. Let's do a really, okay, maybe not that big of a median. Okay, and just to show you how we do that, let's duplicate the layer. And then for this layer here, I'm going to close the layer underneath. I'm going to do an edge detect. Let's do this one. Let's make it nice and strong. We could do, so remember how I said there was Pruitt? So there was, this is Sobel. That's Pruitt. And if we use Robert's cross, we get that result. And then the Laplace, we get this result. So I'm going to stick with Sobel for today. Sobel is usually what I use. Sobel or Canny. Oops. I meant to actually apply that. There we go. Now I'm going to combine these two together. Let's try. If we multiply, we don't get a good result because most of the things are 0. If I do instead overlay, we get kind of a neat effect. Not quite what we're looking for. I could do screen, but that actually lightens the things at the edges, and I want to darken it. Edges. So I could add all different kinds of things. I'm going to do multiply. And then what I'm going to do is I am actually going to invert the colors. So there we go. So there we've just recreated that painted look in the GIMP that was on the slide for Photoshop. All right. Now, how I want to end today's class is just showing you some of the other styles that tools like GIMP and Photoshop have built in. So I'm going to show you the ones from the GIMP. You're welcome to go into Photoshop yourself, and in some of the tutorial content, I'll give you some suggestions on where to look to see what kinds of non-photorealistic filters exist within those tools already. So the GIMP has a whole bunch. And the most interesting ones are generally found under Artistic here. So we can actually do something like, let's do water pixels. And there you can see they've made it look like a watercolor painting. And we can do super pixel size, we can increase it. And this is quite slow, because these algorithms tend to involve a little bit more work, as we're going to see. So that's water pixels. Let's see what other filters we've got under Artistic. So we could do, Van Gogh. Let's do a Van Gogh painting. Okay. Now, sometimes the GIMP will show you a preview and sometimes it won't. Sometimes it will take a really long time to do something. You can see here at the bottom, it's slowly turning it into a Van Gogh painting. And that's one of the things so about non-photorealistic. Everything I've shown you so far was instant real time. As we move into more complicated algorithms, they're going to take time. What's going on in this particular algorithm is it's actually having to compute the gradient or the derivative of the image. It's probably going to be placing some strokes, which means it's going to have to render individual Bezier splines. It's very computationally intensive, although generally faster than photoreal rendering. So let's just see here. It's going to take another few seconds. And I have no idea what it's going to look like. That's kind of exciting. We'll see what it ends up looking like. You might be thinking, oh, you have a very slow computer. This is not a slow computer. It's just a slow algorithm. Interesting. It did nothing. Well, so it happens. So we can... Let's undo it. Let's look at some of these other ones here. Oilify, and it was pretty fast. So this one, its goal is to create something that looks a little bit more like an oil painting. And that one doesn't seem to work either. I'm not having a lot of luck with the GIMP today. So one of the interesting things, you might be like, the GIMP doesn't seem to work. So the GIMP is an open source tool, which means that anybody can contribute to it. Generally speaking, it does actually work really well, but sometimes I find that some of the filters have issues. One of the beautiful things, though, is that you can develop the filters yourself. So in this course, closer to the end, when we ask you to kind of create your own look and style, you can actually create your own GIMP filter if you want to. And the GIMP filters can be written in one of two languages. The first language is Scheme, which is the language that I would do it in, but the other language is Python, and that is the language that I would recommend you do it in if you choose to go this route. Gimpressionist, that's the one I think I was thinking of. And I know this one actually does work. So this gives you all kinds of different parameters. So I'm going to do cubism, and I'm going to select, you know what, let's do it on canvas. We'll do this brush, that's fine. Let's see. That didn't have a huge impact, unfortunately. But they usually do. I suspect it's just a bad image for these. All right. So there are lots of different things that we can do. Now, I've only shown you some of the filters. So blur and edge and noise, we've shown you those. And I've tried to show you some of these artistic ones that are already built in for you. And Photoshop has a similar system as well. There's lots of other filters you're going to see in here that you can use. And these were generally created to, you know, enhance photos, make them more interesting. But you can also use them to create non-photorealistic effects. So for example, we can use emboss to create kind of like a textured paper look. We can, what was I, distorts, collide, oh, there's mosaic there. So there's different mosaics. So this is hexagons. So the tile size is really big. Okay, this algorithm is a bit of a slower algorithm, but you can see it filling in here. We can change that to triangles. That'll be a little bit faster. Under distorts, we also have things like kaleidoscope. All of these filters tend to be built in and give us the ability to do non-photorealistic effects. All right, and I encourage you to try them out to see what is available to you. So there's a few review questions here. So in our next lecture, we are going to be taking a look at toon shading. And we are going to look at toon shading from 3 different perspectives. We're going to look at a really cheap and dirty way of doing toon shading from 3D geometry, which is a lot of fun. And it's actually how the toon shading was done for some of these images that I showed you earlier today, which I got to scroll all the way back for. So for example, this one, this was using the really fast and easy method for toon shading. Then we will look at the proper technique for doing toon shading, which is actually working on a shader to do this. And then we'll also look at how you might approach toon shading, the algorithm specifically, to give toon shading for an actual photograph as well. So a few different techniques for toon shading in our next lecture. So that will be number 9. Number 10, I think we have scheduled to look at pen and ink drawing, so things like contours and stipples and other such things. So lots of really fun topics coming up. We will see you next week.